how's your stuff with Rebecca Sachs?
I actually just formally accepted.
Oh, wow. That's congratulations.
Thank you.
So now a preceding step must be that she offered it to you. That's fantastic. Against what I'm sure was a lot of competition.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was very much shocked. So, well, thank you for your help. I appreciate
Well,
it.
I'm
that I
sure
know
that
you,
might
so
help
I
explain
get a lot of
about
info about the lab,
0.01%
and he's like,
well, that's awesome.
Thank
So,
you.
he's like, well,
so you're going to start there like you graduated
said,
here, what, like this
oh, you
summer?
heard stories.
Oh yeah, this May, and then I started speaking in July.
And
So.
Rohit's face was just like what stories?
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank
Well,
you.
how about that?
Thank you very
That's
much.
all I
That's
asked for
great.
you. He was that explicit. So I'm going to
Just
talk
don't
with
get
him.
pulled into like the whole believing that there's like specialized modules that only do one thing.
Right.
Pretty good.
I will try.
I mean, I say as if anybody has a clear answer to that, but
Pushing him
you know,
to
they say some people think
inhuman
there's definitely
limits.
an answer to that.
Right.
It's fair to say that
He's like freaking out.
it's unclear what the answer is. Sorry about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow, that's awesome. So you're going to be
when
like the
Bernie
land
says
manager.
something, but
Yeah,
it's
I'm
just
running all of
Because
junior and
Julia
junior studies with kids. So
Oh,
I'll be
wow.
handling all those
Remember I
as
told
well
you,
as
like,
basic
Bernie
administration.
and
Is this with regular
that's what
kids
even
or
Himanshu said.
autistic?
Both
For dinner
populations.
yesterday
Yeah.
after
Oh,
his
my
event.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to be a pretty good
So we're coming up
springboard
in
in
5
five
years.
Make
So
sure
that's
that you,
understandable.
as well as just like implementing and running other people's stuff, eventually
He
get to
doesn't
like
say stuff
Yeah.
seriously
initialize
unless he really gets
I
angry.
spoke,
But
yeah.
while joking also, he
I spoke
says
with
some
Dr.
stuff
Sachs,
that
and she said in
he
the second year
pins
she
you
always
like.
has
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
really?
yeah, it'll
Yeah.
take a little while.
students do, or her employees do.
Don't tell them now. You will come to know eventually.
Well, that's exciting. Wow, when did that happen?
Not yet.
Oh, this is fresh news.
Yeah,
Prashant or something.
very fresh.
He asked him, how's it going?
Thank you.
Then he asked someone else over here. Is there sea between India and USA? Is there water between or sea between India and US? Yes. Good. Then it looks like Prashant. This isn't complete by 3:30 starts.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, he's good at deadlines. It seems like he likes to keep it.
Sorry.
But I mean, do you think if your timeline like
Yeah.
is like,
It depends if everyone has to.
Yeah.
Every advisor has their goal.
or yeah, he can estimate. So like, but
So,
yeah, Rohit like he seriously. So you know that confident and he's like, oh, this guy's always busy. He told me that today. I'm like, dude, you need to chill out. Like, I was joking, and I'm sure Doyle was too. Like, relax. Because I have a habit of joking, and I don't know when I'm like.
No. He's fine. We just need to be more friends with Rohit and then he's one person who will never stop. Me and him, like,
Jello.
we grew up, we learned this habit of pulling other people's legs together way back in undergrad.
Okay.
We were roommates. We learned that talent.
Were you guys know each other from undergrad?
Yeah, we were roommates in undergrad also. In the
Okay,
first,
no wonder.
in my first year.
Because, yeah. But he needs to relax. Like, he gets too paranoid with
Yeah, with work.
Yeah.
With Doily, he gets too sensitive.
Too sensitive. Yeah, that's what I thought. Like, my mom always told me, you know, you're sensitive, but I was just like, couldn't always believe it. But dude, like, it is like
That's too
super,
genuine.
like,
That's too
every
genuine.
word.
Yeah.
No, my mom generally said that, comparison. And I'm like, well, I don't want to, like, you know, crying husband or something. Hey, how are you?
I'm fine. I've been better, but I'm fine.
I know you. I went home yesterday, made dinner, and then just relaxed. And then I couldn't fall asleep.
Yeah, I watched a show, Sherlock.
Oh, you watched it all? Yeah. Oh, what was I doing? I was on the computer.
Yeah.
God, I can't. Yeah, I swear, like, I don't know where my time goes because I'm like trying to recollect. I know I was on my bed and my computer actually.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, got home at what, like 6?
Oh yeah, I think it was better around 1, and then I ditched the seminar because I woke up late. And then,
It took like half hour. I don't even know what he said.
No one knows what he said. Like, the poor fellow. He was pretty
He was
enthusiastic.
really excited about it. He really liked his project, which I
How you
was
feeling?
like, awesome.
I
He was
completely
doing
severed my
no
ACL.
Yeah.
Oh no!
Not attached to the bone at all.
To my work,
So I
and
have
I'm
an
like,
appointment in 3
and I
weeks
was-
with a
I woke
surgeon
up
for
like 9
reconstructive
o'clock.
surgery.
I don't know where.
It really sucks.
Yeah.
Because Ben was going to
Yeah,
send
I
me
mean,
to Puerto
it was cool
Rico,
stuff that he was
Cayo,
doing, like,
Santiago, to do the monkey things.
When he was doing
This morning he was like, so you're not going to Puerto Rico?
No, dude, like his stuff, like what he was doing was like the in thing.
Sucks.
Like,
Well, I guess it's good to get it
well,
fixed
my project
properly.
is gonna be
It's good to get yourself fixed
Even the
properly.
professor
Yeah.
did not
I was like so pissed
I
off
can't believe I used to
because
ski
that
without
was
health
actually looking
insurance.
forward to the talk.
Like,
And I told him like,
I just,
who was he?
that's frontal lobe development for you.
He's got to write finish
Risk taking.
But
Yeah.
Are you going to be
No,
like,
but
are you-
his project.
Yeah, I work here, so I have health
Oh,
insurance,
yeah.
but,
Oh,
Yeah, he collaborated.
but,
Yeah. No, it's like a insurance.
Yeah,
It's
it's
so nice out.
suddenly life is like,
This
okay.
morning it was like blowing.
Maybe
like,
we're-
we're doing
maybe it's
on
like
the river.
there is
Like
a
seriously,
perfect
like
storm.
classes outside because we're doing a performance on
It's okay.
Saturday, which is like this national water dance or something. So it's really weird. But yeah.
How's everyone doing?
It's crazy. And now.
well,
it's
thank
like,
you. How are you?
I,
so excited.
Yeah. Oh, so.
every class we have, there's fewer and fewer people in the room, which is,
That happens towards the end of the semester.
I guess it's somewhat to be expected, but I also find slightly worrying. Well, anyway.
They're
But,
missing out.
Huh?
They're missing out.
Well, if any of you want to tell me offline, like, Roger, doing this thing that's driving everyone away or something. No, I'm serious, then tell me because I would actually want to know. But maybe it's just because everyone's busy. I don't know. But anyway, if I am doing anything that's driving everyone away, please tell me. So before we get into talking more about language, so do you remember ages and ages ago I said, hey everyone, I'm going to show you how to like search on PubMed, and you were all like, dude, we already know how to search on PubMed. Don't bother showing us how to search on PubMed. And so subsequent to that, I've actually like sort of met and chatted with several of you, and it turns out that there's actually some sort of some useful PubMed tricks that I don't think everyone actually knows. So I want to show a couple of those, and I think a good way to do this would actually be to pick an example. But I mean, I could make an example up. But I think although you all actually like use PubMed and use Google Scholar, I just want to show you a couple of tricks which actually will be helpful for doing your projects. And on a related note, if you want to meet with me and have asked me and I haven't gotten back to you yet, which is actually entirely possible, just ping me again. Like, do not be shy about like re-pinging me because I've gotten like I have like a lot of emails related to this class, and sometimes things just sort of fall down the pile. So if there's something, if you send me a mail like a week ago saying could we meet and I haven't replied to you, just send me another one, preferably with like could we meet in the subject line. Not like Ray BCS homework or something, and then I'm quite likely to notice it, and then, do not be shy about pinging me again. Yeah, that subject line thing would also help a lot. Okay, so one of the things that's really sort of useful to do for trying to figure out, doing a project is sort of trying to get this feeling for, what's known about this area and what's not known about this area. And what's very useful for that is finding a recent review article. And from chatting with and meeting with some of you, I've discovered that there's a couple of little sort of handy tricks that you may not know. So I want to show you a couple of those handy tricks. And I'm actually kind of curious. So how many of you, for instance, have like done like Boolean searches with wildcards? Boolean just means using and or and not and stuff like that on PubMed. I'm guessing that some, but not all of you have done that. Okay, so let's. How many of you like have restricted by subfield, like searching only for stuff that's in the titles? And so maybe some, but not all of you. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly show. So I think this would be most useful if actually one of you just like threw out a topic, preferably could be one you're doing. Is there any topic that someone would like to find a recent review paper on? It doesn't have to be what you're doing your project on, but just for like sort of we could actually convey not only like these like general tips, but also we might actually find a helpful article for someone. Has anyone just recently been thinking, I wonder what would be an interesting recent review article on X?
Do the ventral stream?
Okay, let's get, okay, this is going to be a good one. Okay.
Yeah, maybe that's too broad.
No, that's brilliant. That's actually perfect for illustrative purposes. Okay.
Fantastic.
Okay, let's do ventral cortex review. Okay, let's just guess. I actually do not know the answer to this question. How many hits are we going to get for this?
A lot. Oh, wait, a review or just ventral cortex in general?
Let's try ventral cortex first. Okay.
You're going to get a lot.
I actually have no idea.
8,000.
No, I'd say probably... Actually, I have no idea.
I have no idea
I
either.
can't even hazard a
I'm
guess.
guessing some number bigger than 1,000,
Okay.
maybe less than 10,000, but I'm just making that up. Okay, let's see. Okay, how many hits?
Okay.
Whoa! 11,666. Okay, so it's very easy. So all you have to do is read 11,666 pages. Okay, so we need to make this more specific. Okay, so I already sort of typed this in. So this is the magic special thing, or one of the magic special things which PubMed has, which Google Scholar does not currently do, is tag review articles. Well, actually, there's two ways you can do it. You can type review into here, or you see there's even like clinical trial review. Can you see that down here? So it actually specifically labels review articles, and that's incredibly useful because just because an article is a review article doesn't mean it will contain the word review, and just because an article contains the word review doesn't mean it's a review article. So Google Scholar does this sort of full text search when it can, and you'll actually tend not to necessarily get review articles. Okay, so let's click on the review. Well, it's easier just to type review in here. Okay. So how many of these are going to be review articles? I don't know. I'm guessing a few hundred. Okay. Okay. Whoa, we've got 951 review articles that mention ventral cortex. Okay. So this is like the difficulty of searching right here. Now my experience from chatting with a few of you is that there's the kind of like what to do next may or may not have been clear. So okay, so what's a good way of making this more specific? You see how like review is like in bold here? That's because it's like a PubMed tag. Okay, so suppose we want to find articles not just that sort of happen to mention ventral cortex in their abstract, but which actually really are about ventral cortex. Okay, what would we do? This, by the way, is a problem you'll run into on Google Scholar as well. And there's a similar trick, like in the advanced search field of Google Scholar. Have you done like the advanced search bit of Google Scholar? Okay, anyway, we can look at that in a minute. Okay, so does anyone know the PubMed trick for how to make these, like specifically make sure these things really are talking about ventral cortex?
So outside of the advanced or refining your search, you're saying there are other tricks? Or is it within
there are multiple ways of solving that problem.
Right.
But a way of doing it is to say, let's make it talk about ventral cortex in the title. Okay.
Okay.
So just as, if you want to send me, if you would like to meet with me, okay, your best bet is to send an email to me which says in the subject line, I would like to meet with you, okay? As opposed to Ray forward BCS homework week 2 continued or something like that, which would be fine too, but it's just going to jump out at me more. Okay, so and that's true not just for me, that's true for any human being. Okay, so the way you may say that something's going to be in the title, okay, is you do this little. There is like a how-to thing here which actually will tell you this, but you put in these little square brackets and you put TI the title. Okay, so let's make sure that ventral and cortex are in the title. And I can't remember at this point whether you need to type ands, so I'm going to type ands anyway. You have to, if you want to enter these Boolean terms, we're going to do more of this in a minute. Okay, you have to put them in capitals just so it knows that it's not a search word. Okay, so let's see, how many things are going to have ventral and cortex in the title? 27. Okay, we're starting to get a little bit more specific. The 27 is still actually sort of too many. Okay, but okay, nice. Okay, this is another thing that a lot of people didn't know about. So I've mentioned a very, very nice review journal as Trends in Cognitive Sciences, and many of you probably know that. You may or may not have looked as much as this journal, Current Opinion in Neurobiology, which is a horrible title for a journal, but a wonderful journal. And it has a very, very nice feature, and I've shown this to a couple of you in meeting with you, and everyone I've shown this to has said, oh, I didn't know that happened. So I want to show you this, because this is just sort of a really extremely nice feature of this particular journal. By the way, this is actually probably a really interesting article. This guy, Eddie Chang, is like a neurosurgeon, and also an incredibly good neuroscientist, and he's done a lot of work recently of recording, for like ECOG it's called, you put like a layer of electrodes actually on the brain of like an epileptic patient.
Yeah, they have a paper that just came out in Science in
Yeah,
February.
everything he publishes comes out in either Science or Nature,
Yeah.
and for a very good reason, because it's all incredibly good stuff. He's done decoding of speech and of phonetic features by recording directly from the cortex. It's beautiful, beautiful work. Okay. Anyway, that's irrelevant, but what is relevant is that he's written recently a paper. Oh, actually, no, that's not relevant, because these review articles, there's two things that make them good. One is that they have short, there's long review journals, like Annual Review of Psychology, Annual Review of Neuroscience, and there's short review articles, which are mostly in Trends in Cognitive Sciences and Current Opinion Neurobiology, a couple of other journals, but those are probably the best ones. And they're always written by really good people. Okay, it's sort of very prestigious to be invited to write one of these reviews for one of these journals. So if you don't have to worry that you're reading something that's written by someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. Okay, but there is a nice aspect of these sorts of papers, which is let's get this paper. That always takes a little while. Okay. Okay, so this is a very nice aspect of current opinion neurobiology articles, which I've shown to a couple of people and which most people don't know about. So it has an annotated bibliography, okay? And if it thinks a paper is really interesting, it will tag it with, let me expand this a bit. You see how I don't know if you can see this, it says like 4 and it has 2 little dots, okay? And some of them will have like 1 dot. Can you see this? It says that it has 1 dot here. Okay. The things that in current opinion neurobiology that get marked with dots, when you go to the bibliography, that means a single dot means they think it's a really interesting paper, and 2 dots means they think it's a super interesting paper. Okay.
The editors or the author?
The authors. Okay. And the authors actually write little mini summaries of what's so great about the dotted papers. Okay. So this is just incredibly helpful.
As an aside, I noticed that also with science papers that are shorter formatted ones, at least from a decade ago or so. I don't know if they still do that, but they would put like the methods sort of in citation within their references. They'd have like descriptions of some of their methods.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Do you know what I'm saying? Do they still do that anymore, or is that an old?
Oh, that's yeah, that's like they would basically sort of put the methods in footnotes. That's like not for a review paper, just for any paper.
An empirical paper.
Yeah, I can't remember if they do that now or not.
Yeah.
I
always
published
wondered
enough
about that.
science papers recently,
Yeah.
or ever. Yeah, I don't know.
But even
I
if
think
you
they
look,
probably put them online, or they
Yeah.
probably put them in
like if you look at the
supplementary
Haxby
information.
paper.
But yeah. No, but in this case, the notes in the bibliography are actually to tell you like what's exciting about these dotted papers. Okay, so anyway, so now we have some more hits. Okay, so we've got ventral cortex in review, but the first hit is about speech. But I'm guessing you were probably interested in maybe a different aspect of ventral cortex. Well, let's try and make this more specific still. So when you were talking about ventral cortex, were you talking about like object recognition?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. So here, this is an opportunity to show you the sort of like wild card bit. Okay, so suppose we want only like object recognition. So this is the nice thing about Boolean searches. You can do like all these ands and ors. Okay, so suppose we want stuff to do with object recognition. Okay, we could put like object, but we don't know if the paper's going to talk about object or objects or object, object dash recognition. So you can put like a little star here. You don't do this in Google, but you do it in PubMed, and then anything that begins with object will come up with that. Okay, so let's see what we get now. Okay, so now we've really gotten, now we're getting somewhere. Okay, so now we actually have 2 extremely relevant looking papers. These may or may not actually be what you want. Okay, so we might need to put in an or. By the way, this second one is by Liz Romansky, who's here at U of R. Don't you know Liz Romansky? She actually, have you heard of you've probably heard of the what and where stream in vision. So there's also sort of a what and where stream in audition, and she discovered that together with Joseph Rauschek. So she does really cool stuff. Anyway, okay, so now we typed an object, but we went from like 27 papers to 2 papers, so we may have over-specified. Okay? So here's we're going to get Boolean again. We're going to do object, or let's say, let's try recognition, okay? Because you're probably interested in object recognition, right? In fact, I shouldn't type recognition. I should do recog and then star, because it might be like recognized or stuff like that. Okay, so let's try that. Okay, here we are. So we're getting, okay, so look, now we've got something about development. So we've got some nice, highly relevant looking review papers down from our initial, 11,000 or whatever it is. And so I just, so let's have just a little look at this. So you've got like stars, you've got ors and ands. You have to put brackets around them if you're doing this. And we're specifying that something's in the title, and we're specifying that it's a review. So, some of you may already know that, but others of you may not. So this is actually a useful thing to be able to do. You can also actually do very similar stuff in Google Scholar. So as well as just typing stuff in here, if you clicked on this little arrow bit here, so if you click on this arrow bit here, then you get all these extra options, with the exact phrase, where they occur in the title. This is very useful. You can specify particular journal. You can specify date range. Okay, so hopefully for at least some of you, I actually showed something that you didn't know before then. But anyway, so that may be helpful with you. Okay, because I think it's not an exaggeration to say that if you can find a recent short review article about the topic that you're trying to write about, that's going to do a big chunk of your work for you, or it's going to at least give you a resource. Now, a review article is not the be-all and end-all of everything. It's just giving you a sort of snapshot. It's just giving you a summary. It's giving you 1 or 2 people's opinions of what should be summarized. So, you can't just read one review article and say, okay, now I know everything I need to know about this area, but it's a good start, especially if you're like, oh, this seems like an area, big and interesting area, but I just did a search, I got 1,000 hits, and I don't know what to do next. Okay, so that was a little mini whirlwind tour of searching. Okay, now let's talk more about language. And after last week's class, I actually found from at least one of you that one of you is even like doing a double major in linguistics and brain and culture science, which I think is really interesting. So some of you may be interested in this, but even if you're not especially into language, there's stuff going on here which is relevant beyond language. Okay, so ways of representing meaning. What are different ways of representing meaning, and how might the brain do it? But this turns out actually to have broader implications. So suppose you don't care about language, and you just say, cross out the word meaning here, or semantics. Semantics is just a jargon term for meaning. And you say ways of representing the world. Okay, even if you don't care about language, we all care about how the brain represents the world. And as you'll see, especially when we talk about embodied, this theory called embodied semantics, you'll see that this is very much about how the brain represents the world, not just how it uses words. Okay, so there's a few different approaches that are all related to each other, but it's a very open question exactly what those relations are. And all of these approaches have been used for trying to understand how the brain represents language and how the brain represents the world. So we're going to give a little summary of what some of them are. So corpus semantics, corpus is just Latin for body, and it just means take a body of text and see how words co-occur with each other. And the more text you have, the better it will work. And this is actually the approach that was taken in the Tom Mitchell paper that we were looking at on Tuesday. And I'll show a bit more example of that in a minute. But but just because I know that, say, say I pick two words that do have a sort of relation to each other, like, I don't know, Volkswagen car. Okay, if you take lots and lots of text that you scrape off the web or wherever you want to get it from, it's quite likely that the word Volkswagen will often occur in sentences quite near to the word car. Not always, but sometimes. And more often than it will co-occur with other words, like, say, train. Okay? So, but it's not just the case that Volkswagen and car are sort of related to each other. There's actually a specific relationship between these things. A Volkswagen is a type of car. Okay? Whereas, truck and car are sort of related to each other, but a truck is not a type of car. Well, maybe it is, but there's a different type of relationship. Okay? So if you wanted to sort of take a bunch of different words and a bunch of different concepts and express these actual relations between them, such as is a type of, or is a group of, or something like that, then that's often called a semantic network. And a very widely used one is one called WordNet that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then another theory, and I just would want to reiterate that these are not rival theories in the sense that if one is valid then the others are not valid. These are sort of different ways of approaching probably the same problem. But it's a very open question exactly how they're all related to each other. Embodied semantics is an interesting theory that's especially of interest to neuroscientists because it sort of makes quite testable predictions and suggests how you can interpret some of your data. That says that the meanings of words are actually grounded in sense modalities. So sense modalities are vision, hearing, touch, movement is sort of a sense modality. So for instance, suppose I have a word like, well, I'll show you some examples in a minute, but the idea would be something like, if I think about the word blue, then that literally is not just a sort of abstract concept of blueness, but that actually will involve me using my visual cortex to represent that word. Okay, even though visual cortex doesn't in itself do language, right? Or if I think about the word, perfume, then my olfactory cortex, like smelling cortex, will actually be activated. Okay? So the meanings of words are really represented in the kind of corresponding perceptual parts of the brain. So as I mentioned, the Mitchell study takes this approach of looking in a big Google text corpus, which actually had 1 trillion words in it, so a very big corpus, and seeing how often different words co-occur with each other. So for instance, we said this on Tuesday, hammer co-occurs quite often with break, very often with touch, much less often with eat. So you say, how does this model and maybe the brain represent the meaning of the word hammer? It sort of represents it as some combination of, a lot of touch, a little bit of break, very little eat. Okay? And it's not at all crazy to think that the brain maybe does represent hammer this way, because if you take this approach of representing hammer, it actually allows you to do a pretty good job of decoding the word hammer from neural data. And so if you just go into some, we showed this last time too, if you go into some big text corpus and say, how often to say the word cat, co-occur with all these different things, then some of them it co-occurs a lot, some of them it co-occurs a little. It's not impossible that there might be something a little bit like this in your brain. That's a theory. Nobody really knows for sure. But if you build a model for decoding fMRI data out of that, then it actually works reasonably well. So any of these models of decoding meaning is going to have to deal with the fact that we have a big continuous space of language. There's lots and lots of different words, lots and lots of different meanings, and they all have relations to each other. So what are some of the pros? And this is a huge oversimplification, by the way, but this is just trying to kind of capture some of the key points. Okay. So if you want to figure out how the meanings of words are represented by going into a big chunk of text, very big chunk of text, lots of different documents, and seeing how often words co-occur with each other, this is something that people have been doing with computers for quite a long time, and it actually works quite well for dealing with individual words. And in fact, almost any computer language processing, like natural language processing is how it's often done, you know, like Google Translate, or you know, even the sort of even the syntax, the sort of style checker that's built into Microsoft Word and stuff like that, they all probably have some of this stuff built into them. And if you have a pair, you know, a pair of single words, and you want to say, well, you know, how closely related are these two words? How closely related is their meaning? Seeing how often they co-occur with each other is really not a terrible way of doing it. But there's also lots of disadvantages. All of these approaches have advantages and disadvantages. Okay, nobody has a clean answer to this question, how does the brain represent language? There's just sort of, you know, approaches which all work to some degree. From the point of view of trying to understand the brain, the biggest problem is that, you know, none of this stuff is actually derived from the brain. This is all derived from going out and looking at, you know, big text documents. This is just computers crawling the web. Okay, there's no brain stuff in it. So if you say, well, how does this relate to what the brain's actually doing? It's not very clear. And another problem is that this is really just looking at sort of how associated are words with each other. So, you know, I might see that the word, like, you know, this example of Volkswagen and car, I might see that the word Volkswagen sort of often seems to crop up at the same time as car, but that in and of itself won't tell me that a Volkswagen is a car, because, you know, other words that often co-occur with car, like wheel, you know, a wheel is not a car, right? It's a part of a car. There's different types of relations, right? If you want to capture the fact that Volkswagen is related to car and wheel is related to car, but they're related to it in different ways, this just sort of co-occurrence statistics is not going to do that for you. So that's what people try to do in semantic networks. So here's just an example of a semantic network. It sort of captures, they're often drawn as sort of box and arrow type diagrams, that sort of captures some of these subpart, subtype type relationships. So suppose I've got, you know, rocks, right? And I say, well, you know, I want to break that down into different subparts. Well, next thing you know, I've got these 3 different types of rocks, and they're all different colors, and they're made out of different stuff. Okay? So the structure here, okay, that's the key point. It's not just that things are sort of associated with each other, but there's actually a set of structural relationships between them. And it turns out that trying to capture the difference between structured relationships and things just sort of being associated with each other is one of the biggest problems in the whole of cognitive science. And in fact, the way in which people have debated about this, specifically in language, sort of tells the story of cognitive science almost in itself. Do any of you know, this is not really off topic, I'll just talk about this for 10 minutes. Do any of you know the story of like Chomsky's review of Skinner's book about language? This is like, I'm seeing some nodding. So, okay, this is sometimes viewed as a sort of watershed. This is sometimes viewed as the time that, the moment that, if there was any moment that gave birth to cognitive science, it was this moment. Okay, so here's like a mini story, and there's echoes of that going on in everything we're going to talk about today. So Skinner was like the chief behaviorist. He was sort of, and behaviorists said, we don't want to talk about neural representations. We don't even believe that you can talk about this thing called the mind. We believe in stuff that you can measure. Okay, and there was actually sort of related. There was a whole school of philosophy called logical positivism that sort of had that view as well. And dealing with stuff that you can measure is very reasonable. Okay, but you know, not everything that is interesting is directly measurable. That's sort of something that they didn't really accept. So one thing that you really can measure is stuff being associated with other stuff. Okay, so you can, for instance, say, you know, you can go out into text and you can say, how often do these words occur with each other? Or you can, you know, put a rat in a box and say, you know, to what degree is it going to try and, you know, push the lever to get food when I flash a light at it? Okay, so there's associations between things, an association between a stimulus and a response, And you can actually sort of explain quite a lot with that. So the behaviorists, as is common in many areas of science, sort of took a good idea but maybe ran with it a bit too far, and they said, we think you can explain everything with that. And in particular, you can explain language with that. So even if you have something that looks really big and complicated like language, or like cognition in general, it's all really just a bunch of associations. Okay? They might be very high order associations. You can see it starts getting quite hand wavy quite quickly, because what does high order association mean? But it's all a bunch of high order associations. So a lot of people for a long time sort of felt that this was maybe not very satisfactory, but it wasn't incredibly clear what to replace it with. And if you just say, well, that sounds sort of hand wavy, that's not an incredibly knockdown argument. Okay? So Skinner wrote this book called Verbal Behavior about language, and Chomsky reviewed it, and he basically pointed out that there's many, many aspects of structure in language. Well, there was a couple of different objections he made, but one of the objections he made was, there's lots of structure in language, and there's lots of structure in behavior that goes way beyond just associations. So for instance, there's a relationship, there's like this example of, there was a relationship between Volkswagen and car, and there's a relation between wheel and car, but those associations are not the same thing, right? There's a relationship between limestone and rocks, and between, sedimentary and rocks, but they're not exactly the same relationship. There's some kind of structure going on here. Somehow the brain, whether it's in language or it's in, planning how you're going to drive to work in the morning, or if it's, figuring out what you're going to do for the next 5 years of your life, or it's deciding how to walk through a room that's full of obstacles, somehow it's representing structured relationships between things. And nobody really understands how it does that. Okay? But the fact that it represents structure somehow is definitely important. Okay? And a lot of the debate about how to represent language, but in fact a lot of the debate about how to represent anything sort of boils down to that, or at least that's a point of view. So one thing that semantic networks try and do is they try and explicitly incorporate some model of structural relationships, and probably the most widely used one. Can you read this text from back where you are? I tried to find a picture of a semantic network that had big text font. Most of them have tiny. Okay, I guess you can read that. Okay, so this thing called WordNet, which is basically an attempt to capture the relationships between lots and lots and lots of different words, including their structural relationships, such as is, a, type of. And it was actually founded by a guy who's quite famous for something else called George Miller. Have you guys heard of this paper called The Magic Number 7 ± 2? This is also kind of one of the sort of founding moments of cognitive science. That's actually about working memory. But as well as being super famous for his work on working memory, he also founded this thing, WordNet. And you can go to their website and you can say, enter some words and tell me what relations there are between them. And it will give you a whole set of different relations between them. So for instance, it will tell you that, a truck is a motor vehicle, which is a type of artifact, meaning a man-made thing. And it will say, if you have motor car, there's different types of motor car, like a hatchback, or this phrase gas guzzler, which you might not even realize is a car because it doesn't contain the word car, is a motor car. So you can actually, there's a lot of aspects of the relations, not just between different words, but between concepts that are incorporated in this thing, WordNet. And WordNet has actually already cropped up earlier in the class, but we sort of skated over a little bit. So remember when I was showing you these videos of the Jack Gallant work? One of the videos was of this Hutherdal study of semantic space in cortex, where they showed people a bunch of movies and they'd sort of gone through the movies and tagged, what objects are present in each frame. I don't know if they did that, but they probably did that automatically because it would have taken forever to do it by hand. I actually don't know. I'd have to have a look. And then they sort of recorded the time courses from people looking at movies, and then they tried to represent what types of different categories were present, were active for different parts of the brain. And the way they actually represented that was by showing it using sort of WordNet grid. Now, can you see this at all? The problem with these types of pictures is they always have tiny, tiny font. Can you people at the back, can you sort of read those words a little bit? Okay, so you see it, but what you can definitely see is that this has a tree structure, okay? So, so the tree structure is sort of these is-a type relations. It turns out for this study they were actually using this more for visualization than for actually analysis, but it's sort of interesting that they used it at all. So we've got here, you know, athlete and person, okay? And athlete is like a little sort of node coming out of person because athlete is a type of person, okay? Or we've got here rodent is a mammal, and we also have here carnivore is a mammal, okay? So all of the different words that they had that they were tagging their movies with, they sort of, you know, entered those words into WordNet and got the and WordNet gave them this sort of semantic tree of the relationships between these different words, and they said, well, that would be a nice way of visualizing the. So here's a voxel that you know, becomes highly active for these words down here, like vehicle, various other man-made devices, vehicle. What else do they have here? A laptop, clothing, building, and less active for, say, in this case, parts of the body or natural things like food. And here's a voxel that has sort of more or less the opposite pattern of responses. So WordNet is actually a nice way of showing not only similarity between, or co-occurrence between words, but also these sort of conceptual relations between words, especially one thing being a type of another thing. And then again, we didn't really talk about this because we just sort of showed the video, but they did an interesting thing of saying, okay, well, this is a big, complicated space. There's tons of stuff going on there. Can we try and boil this down to its key ingredients? And this, again, is something that's actually done in not just in studies of language, but in studies of the brain in general. The big problem with trying to understand the brain is it's big and complicated, and we want to sort of try and pull out what the key underlying features are. So they used principal component analysis, PCA. I'll talk a bit more about what that is in just a minute. Many of you probably know that. But so they broke this down into principal components. So meaning basically the main things that were the main underlying things that were going on. So, and it turned out that if you take this sort of big, complicated, big tree-like thing and you try and say boil it down to the two most important dimensions, then you get, so here's now, this is just, everything is plotted along, you know, one dimension here, one dimension here, that you get interesting sorts of groupings that, for instance, all the animals end up over here, and all the people end up over here, and all of the man-made objects end up over here. So it suggests that underlying all this complexity, the brain might actually be sort of deciding along fairly, at least a lot of what the brain might be doing might be deciding along these sort of fairly basic dimensions, such as, is this thing a person? Is this thing man-made? Is this thing an animal?
Here, Raj, I
Yeah.
have a quick question.
Yeah.
So some of the earlier ones you showed, the sort of tree diagrams,
Mhm.
those were in individual voxels. Like I think precuneus was one, and the other one was, if you keep going back, right? So yeah, like precuneus,
Right,
PPA.
right.
So is that is the last analysis that you showed collapsing across all voxels? I mean, I
Right, yeah, it is. So what they did is they said for every given voxel we can say, you know, to what degree did this voxel become active for, you know, all of the different things that cropped up in the movies. And so you can plot that for one different voxel, but then you end up with, you know, thousands of different
right.
maps for thousands of different voxels, and you want to say, what's the big underlying bigger picture?
and that's what goes into the space in which they can.
That's what goes exactly. That's
perform
what
the
goes
PCA.
into the principal component analysis. So it's actually And it turns out that people do something incredibly similar to this when they're looking at these distributional word co-occurrence statistics as well. Have any of you heard of this thing called latent semantic analysis? So anyway, so that's basically taking these word document co-occurrence statistics and basically doing principal component analysis on it to try and find out like what's the big underlying stuff. Now I say this as if it's actually clear what principal component analysis is. So what I'm about to tell you is highly known to some of you and may not be known to all of you, but there's probably one or two aspects of it that maybe many of you might not know. So so the idea is you have a whole bunch of stuff and you want to find out what's the kind of some underlying important factors in it. So people usually show it as a picture of like an oval sort of ellipsoid type thing here, and of course life is not usually this simple, but in the case it's good for illustrative purposes. So in the case of a sort of big stretched out cloud of dots, it's pretty clear that the most important thing that's going on is that the dots are sort of stretched out this way. Okay, but there's another thing which is going on, which is they're not just purely lying across along a line, they're actually stretched out this way a little bit as well. So principal component analysis is a sort of mathematical trick for figuring out what are the big underlying things. What I just said was a big oversimplification, but it sort of captures the main part. Now,
earlier in the semester you did a nice job of simplifying it, right? With like sumo wrestlers and
that's
basketball.
not exactly principal component analysis,
Okay.
actually,
Maybe
but
that's
it's very
just
related.
a discriminant
Yeah, it turns out
analysis.
there's interesting relations between those things. That's the whole. We can talk about that if you want. Well,
Well, yeah, maybe offline or something.